Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Education Board.
Hello students, welcome to TV Learning Programs. I'm Teacher Agre, teacher of Entrepreneurship. Today I'm going to learn with Senior 2 students. And we are still on Unit 4, which is Market. And our lesson today, we are going to talk about the disadvantages of economic integration. I expect you learners, at the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain the disadvantages of economic integration, the demerits of economic integration. But before I take you into today's lesson, I want us to first do these questions. There are 2 questions, revision questions. The first question, the table below shows how many bananas people will buy at different prices. This is the table. It has 2 columns, price in Rwandan francs and quantity demanded, the quantity of bananas that people will buy. Buying, because demand is the desire and willingness backed by the ability to buy. Now, that's why we have the quantity demanded. These are different prices given, and these are different quantities bought at these prices. Now, the first question is, plot the values on the graph and draw a demand curve. Plot the values on the graph and draw a demand curve. We are given, this is a demand schedule. Remember, learners, what we learned in the previous lessons. We said a demand schedule is a table showing different quantities demanded at different prices. We are given different prices and we are given different quantities. Now, we have to draw a demand curve using this demand schedule. The information that is on this schedule, we have to put it on a curve. Now, the illustration of the demand curve. How do we illustrate the demand curve? The illustration of a demand curve. The illustration of a demand curve using the demand schedule. Remember, learners, we said a demand curve, it is a graphical representation derived from a demand schedule. Now, how do we draw this demand curve? We are given different prices and we are given different quantities. We are going to draw the demand curve. Any curve must have an origin, because when we start counting, we count from 0. Any curve must have an origin. Now, on the y-axis, we indicate price on the y-axis. And on the horizontal axis, we indicate quantity demanded. Quantity demanded. Quantity demanded. Quantity demanded. And remember, the demand curve slopes downwards from the left to the right. The demand curve slopes downwards from the left to the right. This is our demand curve. That is sloping downwards from the left to the right. Now we are going to plot these values to the graph. These values, we are going to put them on the graph. Because the question is, plot the values on the graph and draw a demand curve. We have 100. On 100, the quantity purchased, the quantity bought is 5. On 120, the quantity purchased is 4. On 140, the quantity purchased is 3. And on 160, the quantity purchased is 2. And on 180, the quantity purchased is 1. Now, 100, we have 100. 100, the quantity demanded on 100 is 5. Then, on 120, the quantity demanded is 4. On 120, the quantity demanded. On 120, the quantity demanded is 4. Then, on 140, The quantity demanded is 3 on 140. On 140, the quantity demanded, what was bought on 140 is 3. What was bought on the price of 140 is 3. Then on 160, the quantity demanded is 2. On 160, the quantity demanded is 2. On 160, the quantity demanded is 2. And on 180, the quantity demanded is 1. On 180, the quantity demanded is 1. Is 1. This is how we plot the demand curve. This is the demand curve. This is our demand curve. This is the demand curve. A graph showing different quantities demanded at different prices. At a higher price of 120, the quantity demanded is less. The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. You remember the law, the theory of demand, which states that the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. And the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. That is why at 120, the quantity demanded is 1, and at a lower price, which is 100, the quantity demanded is high. That is how we illustrate the demand curve. That is how we plot the demand curve, which is sloping downwards and is showing different quantities on the horizontal and different prices on the vertical. Then, the next is, the table below shows how many banana sellers are willing to sell at a certain price. The table below shows how many banana sellers are willing to sell at a certain price. This is supply. Because supply, it is the amount of commodities that producers are willing and able to put at the market at a given price. We are given a supply schedule which has 2 columns. The first column indicates price, and the second column is indicating quantity supplied. We have different prices. And we have said that a demand schedule, a supply schedule, it is a table. You can see it is a table showing different prices and different quantities supplied at different prices. This is the supply schedule. Then the second question is, plot the values on the graph and draw a supply curve. Let me repeat the question. Plot the values on the graph and draw a supply curve. We are going to plot these values on the supply curve. We are plotting the values on the supply curve. An illustration of a supply curve. An illustration on the second question, which is 2. This was question 1. Then an illustration of a supply curve. 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 Any curve must be with an origin. This is the origin. On the vertical axis, we indicate price on the vertical axis. And even on the horizontal axis, we indicate quantity supplied. Quantity supplied. The amount that was supplied at a given price. That is what we indicate on the horizontal axis. Remember, the supply curve has a positive slope because of the direct relationship. It does not slope downwards. It has an upward slope. It has a positive slope. The supply curve has a positive slope. This is our supply curve, which has a positive slope because of the direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. As the price increases, the quantity supplied increases. As the price reduces, the quantity supplied reduces. They move in one direction. That is why the supply curve has a direct relationship. Now we are going to plot these values on the supply curve, on the graph, on the supply curve, on the supply curve. 100, it is 1, the quantity supplied. On the price of 100, at 100, the quantity supplied is 1. At a price of 120, the quantity supplied is 2. At a price of 120, the quantity supplied is 2. At a price of 120. At the price of 140, the quantity supplied is 3. Is 3 at a price of 140. At a price of 160, the quantity supplied is 4. At a price of 100, at a price of 160, the quantity supplied is 4. At a price of 180, at a price of 100, at a price of 180, at a price of 100, at a price of 180, the quantity supplied, at a price of 180, the quantity supplied, at a price of 180, the quantity supplied is 5. At a price of 180, the quantity supplied is 5. The quantity supplied is 5 at a price of 180. Quantity supplied. The quantity supplied. Then which means that at a higher price, they supply more. Because the law of supply states that the higher the price, the higher the quantity supplied. That is why at 120, the quantity supplied is high. And at a lower price, the quantity supplied is less. We are supplying 1. That is how we plot the values on a supply curve. This is a supply curve. Our today's lesson, we are going to talk about the disadvantages of economic integration. Remember, learners, what we learned in the previous lesson. We learned about the merits, the benefits of economic integration. Countries that are trading together in a given region, like the East African community or COMESA, which benefits do those countries enjoy? Then today we are going to talk about the disadvantages of economic integration. What could be the demerits that countries are trading together can face if they are trading together in a given region? The first disadvantage of economic integration, it encourages trade diversion, which discourages the consumption of goods within the region because they are sold at high prices. Trade diversion. What is trade diversion? Trade diversion, this concept, trade diversion refers to the shifting of the channel of trade from a low-cost non-member state to a high-cost member state. Refers to the shifting. This is where a country shifts the channel of trade. This is where a country shifts the channel of trade, trade diversion. This is where a country shifts. This is where a country shifts the channel of trade. A country shifts the channel of trade, from a low-cost non-member state, from a low-cost non-member state to a high-cost member state. From a low-cost member state to a high-cost member state. To a high-cost member state. To a high-cost member state. That is what we call trade diversion. Now, economic integration leads to trade diversion. How does it lead to trade diversion? Take an example. Assuming that Rwanda, before joining the East African community, assuming that Rwanda, before joining the East African community, Rwanda used to buy sugar from Malawi. They used to buy sugar from Malawi at a lower price. Before Rwanda, we are assuming that before Rwanda joining the East African community, before trading with other countries in a given region, which is East African Community, they used to buy sugar from Malawi at a lower price. Now, Rwanda has joined the East African Community. They have joined now the East African Community. They have to trade with other countries. It used to buy from a non-member state. Now, a non-member state is Malawi, because Malawi is not part of East African Community. Now, if Rwanda starts trading with other countries like Kenya, Tanzania, and other countries within the region, Rwanda will start now buying sugar within the region, because they have to trade with other countries in a given region. Now, Rwanda may be forced to buy commodities within the region at a higher price. If Kenya, they are producing sugar, Rwanda will not continue buying sugar, because commodities from non-member countries are restricted. Now, Rwanda may divert and it starts buying sugar from Kenya at a higher price. Now, the disadvantage of economic integration: a country may be forced to buy goods from within the region at a higher cost. That is what we call trade diversion. A country is shifting the channel of trade from a non-member state, from a low-cost non-member state to a high-cost member state. They used to buy sugar from Malawi at a low cost before joining the economic integration. Now they have joined. Now they are trading with other countries in a given region. The country may be forced to buy products within the region at a higher price, which is a disadvantage of economic integration. The next disadvantage: loss of government revenue due to elimination of tariffs, which would otherwise contribute to government tax revenue in form of import and export duties. Remember, learners, what we learned in the stages of economic integration. We talked about free trade. And we said in the stage of free trade, they remove trade barriers. Taxes are removed. And when taxes are removed, for example, if Rwandans used to buy goods from Kenya or Tanzania, and those products that were imported were charged taxes, the government could earn revenue, because they could charge taxes on imported products, and the government could earn revenue from those taxes charged on import products. Now, if a country is trading with other countries and taxes are removed on imports, now the country is going to lose revenue. The disadvantage of economic integration: there is loss of government revenue due to elimination of tariffs. The next disadvantage: an uneven distribution of benefits within the region. Some countries which are well endowed with resources benefit more than others as a result of the wider market created, which brings regional imbalances. There is an uneven distribution of benefits, which will lead to regional imbalances. For example, countries that are trading together in a given region, if Rwanda is trading with other countries, and Rwanda has plenty of resources, is endowed with resources, Rwanda will be able to export more products to these countries because they have enough resources to produce more products. Now, if Rwanda has more resources, they have plenty of resources, they will produce more than other countries. They will export more compared to other countries, which will help a country to generate more incomes. And a country will develop at the expense of other countries. Now, with economic integration, countries that are trading together, if those, like countries which have enough resources, they're able to produce more goods, they will export more and generate more incomes. You find that they are developing at the expense of other countries, which causes regional imbalances. Member countries, the next disadvantage. Member countries lose their sovereignty due to formation of an economic union, as some policy matters and decisions are made jointly. They lose sovereignty. They lose independence. Remember, learners, what we looked at among the stages of economic integration. We talked about the economic union. And within the economic union, where there is joint ownership of enterprises and joint decision making, there are some policies, there are some decisions which are jointly made. Now, you find that a country may, on some policies, the country may not decide on its own. In order to decide some of the policies, they have to consult other member states. That means that a country is not independent. If a country cannot decide on some policies, they have to first consult other member countries. This indicates that a country is not independent. Now, with economic integration, where there is joint decision-making, joint decision-making, this makes a country to lose independence because they cannot decide on some of the policies. They will have to consult other member states in order to decide some of the policies, which makes a country to lose its sovereignty. The next point, it encourages dependency syndrome. As member countries greatly depend on other countries within the region, which undermines countries' need to be self-reliant. It encourages dependency. For example, if it is based on comparative advantage theory, if trade is based on the comparative advantage, theory. Remember, learners, we talked about comparative advantage theory when we are talking about the merits of economic integration, where member countries specialize on products where they incur the lowest opportunity cost, and they forego producing commodities where they incur a high opportunity cost. Now, specialization will bring dependency. For example, if Rwanda specializes in production of tea, Kenya specializes in production of coffee, Uganda specializes in production of maize, and even other member countries within East Africa if they specialize. Now, this will bring dependency. This will bring dependency. Each country will depend on the other because of specialization. And since countries are trading together, if a country cannot produce products on its own, it is easy to buy them from other countries, meaning a country will be depending on other countries. Now, specialization based on comparative advantage brings dependency, causes dependency. And in case of conflicts, a country will suffer because each country has specialized in production of a given commodity. It means if Rwanda specializes on production of coffee, it will not produce, on specialization of tea, it will not produce coffee. Now, to get coffee, they have to depend on Kenya. And if Kenya, they want tea, because they are not producing tea, they will have to depend on Rwanda to get tea. Now, with economic integration, based on the principle of comparative advantage, it brings dependency. The next point is, it leads to wastage of resources due to surplus created as a result of member countries producing similar products. Wastage of resources. For example, like if member countries are producing similar products, this will cause a wastage. There is wastage of resources. Now, like in the East African community, if Rwanda is producing coffee, Uganda is producing the same product, coffee, Kenya is producing also coffee, and even Tanzania is producing coffee. They are producing the same. They are producing similar products. And this will cause wastage because due to overproduction, it will cause wastage because this will make countries to lose market. Because if Rwanda is producing coffee and Uganda is producing coffee, since Rwanda is producing its own coffee, it may not buy coffee from Uganda. Now, if countries are producing similar products, their products will lose market. Their products will lose market. Now, in case countries have produced more products, this will lead to wastage of resources because they are not benefiting. They have produced more products to sell to other countries, but there is no market, meaning they have not benefited from the resources. The next disadvantage, which is the last disadvantage, member countries may be compelled to buy poor quality products instead of importing better ones from non-member countries, thus lowering the standards of living of the citizens within the region. Member countries are forced to buy poor quality products that cannot satisfy their needs. When member countries that are trading together in a given region, If these countries are not complying with standards, because like countries which are trading together, they will try to restrict goods, commodities from non-member countries that are not trading with those countries in a given region. Now, like if these member countries are not complying with the standards, they don't comply with standards, countries may be forced to buy poor quality products because they don't have an alternative. Commodities from non-member states have been restricted. Now, countries that are trading together will be forced to buy products from within the region. Now, if those member countries don't comply with standards, citizens may end up buying products that are of poor quality, which will affect their standards of living. Those are the disadvantages of economic integration. Before I end the lesson, I want to leave you with one question. Homework. As you're writing down the question, I can read through the question. The question is, explain the demerits of economic integration. Explain the demerits of economic integration. Thank you, learners, for watching. Thank you for being attentive. We meet next time.